often when we are looking for answers, or often when we are in a crisis, or when something upsets us, we embrace the first or second thing that comes our way that meets our demand. This is human behavior. It has nothing to do with whether you're born again or renewed in your mind. Human beings, when there's a need, they want a way out. There's nothing wrong with that. However, I'm talking to believers now. I'm not talking to worldly people. If you're not born again, why are you listening to this message? I only address believers here. Listen. Whenever you are in a crisis, or whenever there are things going on and you don't know what it is, only embrace something or someone when God has approved of it or approved of that individual. Or let me say it like this. Never crown someone God disposed of. Let me repeat that because this needs to get through to you. Never crown someone God disposed of. Very important, because too often, and this happens to believers, that's why I need to address it. I'm not concerned in this message concerning what worldly people do, because they need to be born again. They are lost. Too often believers embrace people in their lives that God never wanted them to be involved with. Why do believers fall for this trap? Because too often believers are not Christ-centered. Too often believers are still hooked in their short-sightedness. Too often believers are relying on their own understanding, which is very limited. And when you're relying only on your own understanding, so when you're distracted, in other words, you will likely make fatal decisions. A fatal decision is a decision that will cost you in the long run. A fatal decision is a decision that doesn't seem bad when you make it. That decision may even, quote unquote, solve something. It doesn't really solve anything, but it gives you relief from an issue. It may even get rid of a symptom. That's why you think you make the right decision. But when you look at it in the long run, it will only generate long-term harm. A very easy example. Let's say you have a headache. You may think, okay, I'm going to take some paracetamol. Okay, you can do that a few times. But let's say now that headache continues. Someone tells you, you know what? Just smoke some crack, man. And you think, what? Smoking crack? I ain't doing that. But then someone tells you, well, you don't have to really smoke crack, but you can try marijuana, or we'll try to offer you something. Or you can go to a shisha lounge and smoke a shisha. In some places, they call it smoke a hookah. The shisha is also called a hookah in some places. Well, they have different names for it. Let's say you think, you know what, let me do it. And you do it. And after you smoked that thing a few times, you never have a headache again. So you think, whoa, it worked. Well, at least you think you never have a headache again. But then later, you begin to crave smoking this thing over and over again. And you think, okay, I'm doing just a few times. So now it's not about the headache anymore. Now you need to keep smoking it. So what happened was that there was a symptom called headache that you fought, but it was just a symptom. But when the symptom came back, that was a red flag for you to realize that there's an underlying issue. But instead of going for the underlying issue, you were offered an escape. And that escape worked. It worked so well that you became attached to the method of escape. And before you know it, now you had a bigger issue to deal with, which is an addiction. So not only do you have the underlying issue of the headache, you also have an additional issue to deal with. So now you have a double package. So that was a fatal decision. Now, it's not faith in the sense that you're doomed forever now. You can recover, you can heal. But it's going to be more difficult now. And it could have literally been fatal for you also, but it didn't. Praise God. Do you know, believers, that there are times Satan doesn't really have to do much to trap us because our own short-sightedness works in Satan's advantage? I'm telling you the truth here. Sometimes demons just sit back and relax because they know that a believer has wrong thinking patterns that the believer doesn't see. And the demons know sooner or later they will make decisions that will appear right onto them, but those decisions will entrap them. So we'll just wait till he or she makes those short-sighted decisions, and then we'll take it on from there. So when you still have those wrong thinking patterns, demons may even assist you. They may even manipulate circumstances in your favor. Why are the demons doing that? Because they know that you have a wrong way of thinking that will get you trapped in the long run anyway. So your own mind is a trap when it's not renewed. So when your own mind is a trap, demons will promote that mind. They will enable that mind because they know that that mind will get you in trouble sooner or later. That's why often when believers find themselves in a big crisis, that big crisis was preceded by a period of ease. What happened in that period of ease? In that period of ease, the demons were steering them into the trap they are now. So that trap didn't just appear out of nowhere. It progressed and developed over time. But the believer was not aware of it because the believer was distracted. And the reason the believer was distracted because their mind was not renewed. So listen, believer. Whatever is going on, whether things are at ease or there is resistance going on, learn to put things in context. Remember, behavior drives circumstances. Okay, circumstances don't just appear out of nowhere. They are actors. People that act, and those actions have consequences. And there are people reacting on those consequences. That's the dynamic that's going on. And then you have evil spirits that seek to retain their hold on the human population by using people's actions. Sometimes evil spirits can even control someone directly and use that body of that individual to cause consequences. And then you have believers with the Holy Spirit who are able to counteract that and overrule it. So, behavior is what drives a circumstance. So whenever there's a circumstance, there is a behavior, whether it's a group behavior or individual behavior that drives that circumstance. And that behavior takes place in a context. There is no such thing as behavior without a context. Every psychologist will tell you that. I'm not a psychologist, I'm an anthropologist. Okay? But there's something anthropologists and psychologists agree on. There is no such thing as behavior without a context. Every behavior takes place within a context. Because it's that context that either enables or disables that behavior. Okay, let's say you are going to the supermarket late at night. Okay, that's maybe a behavior. That behavior becomes a habit. Why are you doing that? Because there are no robbers on the streets. The police doing a good job. The people around there earn a good income, so nobody tends to steal from one another. So the context is a safe social climate. And within this safe social climate, you are enabled to go to the supermarket at night. Because the chance of being robbed is almost zero. And because it's a safe social climate, the store owners and shopkeepers are more open to the idea of opening their businesses for longer. So because there's a safe social climate, the economy is going well and stores are open sometimes 24/7 and the wealth remains in circulation in the community. Okay? Let's say now the situation changes and there's a gang that moves into the neighborhood and they begin to rob people. So now people don't go often to the supermarket at night anymore. So now many of the shops begin to close at 6 or close at 8. So within this context now, you're not going to see someone likely to go to the supermarket at night, even if the supermarket is open. Why? Because the individual is aware that there's danger out there. If you do see someone on the street at night, he is either a drug dealer or someone involved in the criminal world, or he is someone that doesn't think clearly. Because in a context of let's say in a toxic social environment where violence becomes the norm, people are anxious of confrontations. So they avoid bad situations no matter what. Okay, so the context enables or disables a behavior. And behavior never stands still. So if you have a healthy, safe social climate and economy now is booming due to that safe climate, it will bring more wealth. People will become freer, more creative. So it will advance and advance. But the moment you have a dangerous climate, it will become worse and worse. So those are the two directions behavior can go in. Worse or better. Stagnation is the worse being prevented from escalating. That's what stagnation is. Stagnation means that behavior is becoming worse and worse, but the worst is fought against, but not eliminated, because people are not pushed into the better. They just prevent from escalating into the worst of that's possible. So if you have a neighborhood where there are a lot of gangs, but the homicide rate is low, that neighborhood is becoming worse and worse. But because there's a lot of police presence, and because there are many hidden agents within those gangs, the amount of homicides are low. Does it mean now that it's safe in the neighborhood? No. There's still tension, it's still toxic, and eventually it will escalate and turn very ugly. But that is prohibited, or prohibited is not the right word. That is restrained by the local authorities. It can also happen the other way around, that something is booming and people want to limit the boom by enforcing boundaries. A boundary is a fictive limitation you impose on yourself. And because you want to feel good with this limitation, you enforce this limitation often through violence on someone else. That's what a boundary is. Okay? So, now you know that all behavior takes place in a context, because behavior drives situations. So understand that situations, or you can call them circumstances, are the manifestation of a context. Write it down. Circumstances and situations are manifestations of a context. Or you can say they are the fruit of a context. So whenever there's a situation or a circumstance going on, look at the context behind it, because there's a context behind it that's manifesting itself. Okay, one example. Let's say you have this neighborhood and people, the neighbors greet one another. But there is one particular neighbor that lives there that nobody greets. And you notice this. You notice that the people there tend to avoid this individual. But then you want to know why. Because you figured out that this guy that lives there has no record. There are no complaints about him at the local municipality, so why are people not greeting him? And then you find out that years ago, when the guy moved in, one of the residents became offended because he didn't give in to the expectation of the community. It was something quite trifle that didn't add up, but he just made plain, I'm not giving in to this thing. because the expectation didn't add up. So the one that took offense began to murmur and complain about him. And sooner or later, actually soon, most of the people in that neighborhood turned on him. Because the people couldn't handle it that someone that arrived new challenged what was going on. But because they couldn't get the guy to move, later it turned into a confrontation, and that confrontation backfired, and the original accuser turned on his own wife, beat his wife, so there was a big domestic violence situation, and this was quite embarrassing. So, if anyone still after that wanted to complain about that man could easily point out the whole context to them, and they wouldn't be able to give an account of it. So nobody wanted to embarrass themselves again and again. Mentally, they couldn't handle it. So people just pretended the guy didn't live there, and when they saw him, they just walked away. So what's going on here? The avoidance of the community towards this man that lives there, that is the situation. The context is that psychic violence backfired. So now they have no choice but to face their own self-destruction, but because they don't want to, because if they have to, remember they're not willing to participate in solutions, but if they have to face their own violence, they will likely turn on each other. And nobody wants that to happen. They just want to be left alone. So the avoidance, the avoidance against that man, that situation, is the fruit of their psychic violence that backfired. That's how you need to look at circumstances and situations. Look at the context behind it. And that is something believers today seldom do. There are believers doing it. I'm happy about that. But too often, believers don't do this. There are worldly people without Christ, people with almost no knowledge of the spiritual world at all, that do this. Look, it can be that you see a woman in her late 20s and she has Instagram, she's making fashion posts, not nude pictures or half naked pictures, not like that, but she's just making selfies where she tries out different fashion styles. And she's working at a shop. She's polite. She doesn't even have Facebook. She only has Instagram. So you think, okay, she has 500 followers. She only follows 30 people. So she gets a lot of attention. But then you realize, okay, that's the situation here. But where is her husband or her boyfriend? If she gets so much attention, surely there must be some guy around. But then you figure out that she still lives with her mother. And you think, what? She's 29 years old and she lives with her mother even though she has her own income? So you begin to think something's wrong here. Now look at the context. You have a 29-year-old woman still living with her mother. Where's the father? So if she's living with her parents, that would be one thing. But she's living with her mother. Where's the father? So the father's out of the picture. That's a red flag already. And she's getting a lot of attention on Instagram, but she doesn't like social media. Yet she is on social media seeking attention from others. What's going on? The context is that this woman grew up in a broken household. She was likely violated, whether it was sexually or emotionally or physically or one or the other, and she never fully recovered. She never learned to process frustration and behavior properly. So throughout her 20s, she always got tired of the men that showed interest in her, and she always had a reason why she dumped them. And living on her own, she did it, but she would always feel very lonely. So she preferred moving back to her mother. Her father was out of the picture, and she never forgave her father. So you're dealing with someone that's mentally defect, emotionally dysfunctional, and who is in denial. That is why she clings onto her Instagram profile, and that's why demons are using that Instagram platform to keep her in bondage, because she gets a dopamine rush by all the people that give her likes and positive comments on Instagram. But this rush of dopamine by all those likes and nice comments, it's like a drug. It blinds her from seeing how defect and dysfunctional she is, and that she needs to be delivered. So, if you only look at her Instagram profile, you would see a situation. But when you look at the situation carefully, you notice that something is not right with the situation. And then you do your investigation to find out about the context. And once you understand the context, the situation makes perfect sense. Because the situation or circumstance is the fruit or manifestation of the context. In this case, it's a female in denial. Now, I can make this video very long. I don't intend to do that. Just understand, believer, that you need to learn to put things in context. I'm not telling you to, to box people, in a sense that you put people in a box, in a category, to label people. I'm not talking about labeling people here, or labeling circumstances. I'm talking about looking at the context. Find out what the context is. It can be, for example, that you have a child that's defecating all over the place at school. And that's a situation. The circumstance is also that other children are annoyed. Some of the parents of other children are thinking, what? That girl is defecating all over the place? What's going on? Now you can take a lot out of the situation. But then you have a child psychologist that thinks, okay, this girl, 6 years old, is defecating all over the place. Let me look at her background. The school psychologist finds out that the 6-year-old girl comes from a single mother household where the mother now has a fiance. And the child psychologist finds out that this fiance has been involved with crime. The child psychologist also finds out that the mother used to be involved with several boyfriends in the past that beat her, screamed at her. She has a history of being involved with abusive men. So when the child psychologist looked at the context, he found out exactly what's going on. He told the school that 6-year-old girl is likely being sexually molested. First, the school didn't want to hear about it, but then they sent someone at the house to look, and indeed, the individual that went to the house on behalf of the school noticed that there was a weird vibration in the house. Shortly after that 6-year-old girl began to talk about mommy's boyfriend called Tom, that Tom was touching her often at night. And the 6-year-old girl couldn't understand what was going on, but the people who heard it reported to the police, and the boyfriend was arrested. And he did. He was molesting her sexually, and the mother, who knew about it, was tolerating it because she was so narcissistic and self-obsessed that she only cared about her validation that she got from that boyfriend. She couldn't even think about well-being of her child. She has always been this way. And then you also have relatives, that means the family of that 6-year-old girl, that suspected something was going on, but they didn't take the responsibility. So that's the context. The context is you have a group of people that don't take their collective responsibility seriously. And now you have a predator that takes advantage of this. And the predator is enabled by the people not taking their responsibility to the community. And this social defect is now manifesting in this girl defecating all over the place because she can't think straight. Because the child thinks If I'm unattractive, if I'm dirty, at least Tom wouldn't touch me anymore. The child doesn't understand this abuse, but the child knows this shouldn't happen. The child is traumatized. The child doesn't know what the child is doing. So that the child is not defecating all over the place is a big red flag that that family needs to be addressed and that people need to be held accountable, that action should be taken. So don't only look at the situation or the circumstance. Examine to find out what the context behind it is. I'm going to make a part 2. And in part 2, I'll tell you to listen to part 1 first. Remember, every behavior occurs within a context. And situations and circumstances are the manifestation of a context. So deal with the context. Don't fight the circumstance. Deal with the context. When you deal with the context, you achieve far more with less effort and with less risk to your well-being. That's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.